what every Koreans need to know. A YouTuber, known as Daud Kim, is slowly creeping to change Korea into an Islamic state. His YouTube channel, Daud Kim, is openly promoting, endorsing, and imposing Islam to Koreans. It's either fame, popularity, lack of attention, pure ignorance, or money that drives him to do so. And he's doing it by the book. So, he's very aware of his actions. There are 4 stages of Islamic conquest: infiltration, consolidation of power, open war with leadership and culture, totalitarian Islamic theocracy. Stage 1. Infiltration. Muslims begin moving to non-Muslim countries in increasing numbers, and the beginning of cultural conflicts are visible, though often subtle. First migration wave to non-Muslim host country. Appeal for humanitarian tolerance from the host society. Attempts to portray Islam as a peaceful and Muslims as victims of misunderstanding and racism, even though Islam is not a race. High Muslim birth rate in host country, increase Muslim population. Mosques used to spread Islam and dislike of host country and culture. Calls to criminalize Islamophobia as a hate crime. Threaten legal action for perceived discrimination. Offers of interfaith dialogue to indoctrinate non-Muslims. How many nations are suffering from Islamic infiltration? 1. A handful. Nearly every nation. The Islamic leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood and others wish to dissolve each nation's sovereignty and replace it with the global imposition of Islamic Sharia law. Sharia law, based on the Quran, Sirah and Hadith, condemns liberty and forbids equality, and is inconsistent with the laws of all Western nations. As the author and historian Serge Trifkovic states, the refusal of the Western elite class to protect their nations from jihadist infiltration is the biggest betrayal in history. Stage 2. Consolidation of power. Muslim immigrants and host country converts continue demands for accommodation in employment, education, social services, financing and courts. Proselytizing increases, establishment and recruitment of jihadi cells. Efforts to convert alienated segments of the population to Islam. Revisionist efforts to Islamize history. Efforts to destroy historic evidence that reveal true Islamism. Increased anti-Western propaganda and psychological warfare. Efforts to recruit allies who share similar goals. Communists. Anarchists. Attempts to indoctrinate children to Islamist viewpoint. Increased efforts to intimidate, silence and eliminate non-Muslims. Efforts to introduce blasphemy and hate laws in order to silence critics. Continued focus on enlarging Muslim population by increasing Muslim births and immigration. Use of charities to recruit supporters and fund jihad. Covert efforts to bring about the destruction of host society from within. Development of Muslim political base in non-Muslim host society. Islamic financial networks fund political growth. Acquisition of land. Highly visible assassination of critics. Aid to intimidate opposition. Tolerance of non-Muslims diminishes. Greater demands to adopt strict Islamic conduct. Clandestine amassing of weapons and explosives at hidden locations. Overt disregard, rejection of non-Muslim society's legal system, culture. Efforts to undermine and destroy power base of non-Muslim religions, including and especially Jews and Christians. Is there a pattern here? Theo van Gogh is murdered in the Netherlands for insulting Islam. The Organization of the Islamic Conference demands anti-blasphemy laws through the United Nations. France is set afire regularly by youths. The rise of honor killings, Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism, deception, the tenets of Islam, hatred toward Christians and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists. The pattern for all to see is the rise of Islamic intolerance and the covert cultural jihad, to remake host societies into Sharia-compliant worlds, to remove host sovereignty and replace it with Islamic Sharia law. Sharia law that condemns earthly liberty and individual freedom, that forbids equality among faiths and between the sexes, that rejects the concept of nations outside the global house of Islam. Stage 3. Open war with leadership and culture. Open violence to impose Sharia law and associated cultural restrictions, rejection of host government, subjugation of other religions and customs. Intentional efforts to undermine the host government and culture. Acts of barbarity to intimidate citizens and foster fear and submission. Open and covert efforts to cause economic collapse of the society. All opposition is challenged and either eradicated or silenced. Mass execution of non-Muslims. Widespread ethnic cleansing by Islamic militias. Rejection and defiance of host society's secular laws or culture. Murder of moderate Muslim intellectuals who don't support Islamization. Destruction of churches, synagogues and other non-Muslim institutions. Women are restricted further in accordance with Sharia law. Large-scale destruction of population, assassinations, bombings, toppling of government, and usurpation of political power. Imposition of Sharia law. The website www.thereligionofpeace.com keeps track of the number of violent jihad attacks as best it can. The site lists more than 14,000 attacks since September 2001. It is worth a visit. What is occurring, however, that is likely inestimable are events where Muslims are bullied by other Muslims for not being Muslim enough, where non-Muslims are intimidated into doing or not doing what they desire, where remnant populations are in a death spiral simply for being non-Muslim in a predominantly Muslim area. Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, animists, and atheists meet with death, property destruction or confiscation, forced conversion, rape, excessive taxation, the jizya, enslavement, riotous mobs and various other forms of Islam injustice at the hands of Muslims in Sudan, Philippines, Kenya, Malaysia, India, etc. And let us not forget death to apostates the world over. Stage 4. Totalitarian Islamic theocracy. Islam becomes the only religious, political, judicial, cultural ideology. Sharia becomes the law of the land. All non-Islamic human rights cancelled. Enslavement and genocide of non-Muslim population. Freedom of speech and the press eradicated. All religions other than Islam are forbidden and destroyed. Destruction of all evidence of non-Muslim culture, populations and symbols and country. Buddhas, houses of worship, art, etc. The House of Islam, Dar al-Islam, includes those nations that have submitted to Islamic rule, to the soul-crushing, liberty-condemning, discriminatory law of Sharia. The rest of the world in the house of war, Dar al-Harb, because it does not submit to Sharia, and exists in a state of rebellion, or war with the will of Allah. No non-Muslim state or its citizens are innocent, and remain viable targets of war for not believing in Allah. The Christian, Jewish, Coptic, Hindu and Zoroastrian peoples of world have suffered under subjugation for centuries. The dhimmi-esque are forbidden to construct houses of worship or repair existing ones, economically crippled by the heavy jizya, socially humiliated, legally discriminated against, criminally targeted and generally kept in a permanent state of weakness, fear and vulnerability by Islamic governments. It should be noted that forced conversions and slavery are still reported. Homosexuals have been hung in the public square in Iran. Young girls are married to old men. Apostates are threatened with death. Honor killings are routine. Women are legally second-class citizens, though Muslim males insist they are treated better than in the West. These more obvious manifestations may distract from some less obvious ones, such as the lack of intellectual inquiry in science, narrow scope of writing, all but non-existent art and music, sexual use and abuse of youth and women, and the disregard for personal fulfillment, joy and wonder. You, as Korean, do you want this to happen to your country?